This conference will now be recorded.
Great, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Project Review Committee. I know this is the second time we've been together this week, and multiple times over the last couple of weeks. We're moving into the next phase of the Project Review Committee work, which is our fiscal year 21 CoC competition. Really excited to be working with you again. The ESG process went pretty smoothly, so really excited to be able to work on this process with you as well. All right, so just some reminders. I think we have a small group. Certainly, mute your line if you have background noise, but feel free to unmute as you need to. Ask questions throughout. I know the folks that are on today are willing to speak up, so feel free to do that. If you're having some problems unmuting, you can always use the chat box, and we will monitor that as we go throughout. So I'm not going to do roll call because I've already talked to everybody online. Right now, I see Alice, Monica, and Denise. I don't think we have any of our other Project Review Committee members on today. If there is anybody else, feel free to speak up, but I don't see anybody else on our list today. So we'll just go on and move forward. All right. So our agenda for today is talking through the CoC application process. I think the three folks that we have on have been through this process before, but since we are recording this for some other folks that may be helping us with Project Review Committee this year, and they might not be as familiar, I'm going to go through that anyway. We are going to talk, give an overview of the scoring and ranking process. We're going to go through and review the 2021 scorecards. We'll have some discussion. You all can ask some questions if you have questions as we do that. We'll talk briefly about the funding priorities document that the Project Review Committee will use as we get into the ranking process, and then we'll talk about next steps. We're coming up on the time when all the submissions are due, and we'll get started next week on our work. All right, so let's talk just briefly about the CoC application process. As you know, the Continuum of Care coordinates all the homeless programs and services. It is a regional or local body that it coordinates housing services for all households that are experiencing homelessness in their geographic area. And it really is meant to promote a community-wide commitment to ending homelessness. It is a requirement for us to have a continuum of care in order to apply for HUD homeless program funding, the ESG process, which we just went through, the Emergency Solutions Grant, and this process that we're getting ready to launch, the Continuum of Care program, which can sometimes get confusing because we talk about continuum of care in a couple of different ways. Both the planning body and the CoC program, the Continuum of Care program, which is the funding process. So we have 12 CoCs in the state of North Carolina. North Carolina Balanced Estate is the largest geographically and the one that has the most money in the CoC program. It covers 79 of our 100 counties in the state of North Carolina. Most of these counties are suburban or rural counties in the state. And then we have 11 others that are most are single county. We have I think 3 multi-county CoCs. One that is in a rural area up in the northwestern part of the state. So the way that the CoC application process is a little bit different than the process that we just went through for Emergency Solutions Grant. This happens, like ESG, it happens at the CoC level. So the facilitation of the process happens at the CoC level through NCCEH and through the Project Review Committee and the Steering Committee. But the way that where the money comes from and how that money gets allocated is different than the way that that happens with ESG. So in the CoC process, the Department of Housing Urban Development, HUD, issues a notice of funding opportunity. We'll call that a NOFO. That's what we will call it as we go forward. That's our acronym for it. They issue a NOFO that starts the competition. And the CoC then facilitates a process based on the items that are laid out in that NOFO. So individual agencies or local governments or public housing authorities can apply for CoC funds. The CoC puts together a plan of action and sets timelines based on the NOFO for when those project applications come in. Those come to the CoC level, and in our process, that comes to the Project Review Committee. That's you guys. You guys are going to be scoring those applications that come in, and then having conversation based on what we've evaluated about how to rank those projects in a tiered ranking, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. The CoC writes a CoC consolidated application, which is the application, the big application that we have that tells HUD what we're doing as far as our plans for ending homelessness, how we're working with various different populations, how we are working with different systems throughout our 79 counties. And we take that, the ranking list that we're going to be creating together, and we put that in one package, and that's submitted to HUD. Once HUD makes their award announcements, which this year will probably be in the first quarter of 2022, the HUD then will contract directly with those agencies that made application. So the Project Review Committee plays a crucial role. You all are essential in this application process. As you know, having just gone through some of this, you're composed of either at-large members, a group of at-large members, and at least one representative from each regional committee. And then one thing that is really important for the Project Review Committee members are that they are conflict-free. They are not connected to agencies that are applying for CoC funds in that year's competition. The Project Review Committee, as we said, uses the new and renewal scorecards to score each one of the project applications that have been submitted. And then you all are recommending a ranked list of new and renewal project applications to the steering committee for final approval. So the scoring and ranking process allows the CoC to prioritize funding for the best projects. So, what we really want and what HUD expects of us is that we are going to be evaluating our projects and their performance over, if they are renewal, we're going to be looking at their performance. And if they are new, we're going to be looking at their program design, which will help us determine whether or not they can perform at the levels that we need them to give them money. It does ensure that the CoC prioritize that funding for the ones that have the highest performance and that can manage those funds well. These are large pots of money. These are larger than what we are used to in the ESG process. And so we want to make sure that those agencies that we're giving, CoC funding to or allowing to apply for those funds actually have the ability to administer these types of grants. And it is a requirement. So the scoring and ranking process is a requirement that's laid out in the NOFO each year. So this year, the North Carolina Balance of State CoC has almost $12 million in homeless funding at stake in the competition, which is very exciting. As you'll remember from the ESG process, we had about $2.5 million. So this is significantly more than what we have for the ESG fair share each year. We have about a little over $9 million in annual renewal demand. So that means that to renew all of the current projects that are funded through the CoC, we need a little over $9 million to be able to continue renewing those. We do have almost $700,000 in bonus funding that is available that can go towards new projects. Plus this year, as we've had in the last two competition years, we have domestic violence bonus funding, which is for projects that are giving services and housing specifically to households that are fleeing domestic violence. And we have almost $2.1 million. That's a significant increase over the last 2 years. I think we had like $1.6 million available in the last two competition years. So we have almost $2.1 million that we can allocate to projects that might be serving that specific population. We also have CoC planning funding in the amount of almost $420,000 This is a project that is not scored and it is not ranked. It is not considered a renewal project. It is considered a new project. It is only available to the collaborative applicants for the CoC, and that's the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. What we use that money for at NCCEH is to pay for staffing, training, some of the things that allow us to do the coordination of the CoC. As we talked about earlier, in the CoC process, unlike the ESG process, we have to tier and rank projects from your number one top project down to the last project that fits into those two tiers with the amount of money that is available. So tier one is 100% of the annual renewal demand. So we know this year, in this year's competition, we have $9,070,900 that will go into tier one. Tier two is adding up the rest of that money. So that's CoC bonus money plus the domestic violence bonus. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit and what that all means. Are there any questions so far? Y'all good? All right, let's move into the scoring process itself. So the goal of the Project Review Committee is to review and score all of the renewal and new applications and recommend a ranked list of projects to the steering committee for final approval. So that is going to be our work over the next couple of weeks. Once we get submissions from our project applicants, we are going to be taking those, using the new and renewal scorecards, scoring each one of those applications, and then coming together to form a final ranked list. As we talked about, the projects are going to be ranked in order from the project that we think has the highest priority down to the project that we think has the least priority that we are putting into the application process or into the final ranked prioritization list. So that doesn't mean that every project that we review will get into that ranked list, because we only have a certain amount of money that we can put in for application, and we will have, based on what we know right now, we will have more applications that are asking for more money than we will have available. Okay, so that means that there will be some decisions about which projects get into the final list overall, and then we will have to figure out how they are ranked. The instructions for these are in the NOFO. They are very specific about how we do this process. And understanding how the tiers work is probably really important as we begin to rank these projects. So projects that are in tier one, and we talked about that being 100% of the annual renewal demand. It doesn't mean that it's only renewal projects. It just means that the amount of money that we will put for projects that we will put in tier one is that $9,070,000 and some change. These are the projects in tier one. These are the projects that are going to be conditionally awarded as long as the HUD thresholds are met. And so there are a list of thresholds that all applicants need to meet in order to move forward in the competition. So in tier one, projects are relatively safe. If projects that we rank in tier one are likely to be funded because HUD is saying that 100% of ARD goes into tier one. That means that they have enough budget to be able to do that for every CoC in the country, as long as the CoC meets its threshold requirements. We don't expect that we will not meet our threshold requirements, by the way. Projects that are listed in tier two are at greater risk. So that means that any project that we put into tier two and as part of our application will maybe get funded or maybe not get funded. Those that are closer to the top of tier two, nearer to tier one, historically have gotten funded in the balance of states. But there is no guarantee. What happens when HUD gets to tier two is that we go into a national competition. Our CoC application is scored, and so what they do is they order all of the CoCs across the country, which is about 450 different CoCs. They order them in ranked order, and then they start going through tier 2 until there's no money left. So they will, go to the top CoC, and they will fund what projects are in tier 2, and then they'll go to number 2, and then they'll go to number 3, all the way down to 450. If they have enough money for all tier 2 projects, then they will fund them. If they don't, then those CoCs that are at the lowest part of the full ranked list of CoCs, likely they're not going to get some of their tier projects, or they might not get any of their tier 2 projects. So we have to be really careful as we are making that ranked list that the projects that we want to make sure get funded go into tier 2. Go into tier 1. So let's talk a little bit about the scorecard and how we're going to use that. And like I said, in a few minutes, we're going to actually go through that scorecard. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look at it, but we're going to go and we're going to look at it. I'm going to pull it up and we're going to look at it. So there are 4 goals of our scorecard. If you have done this before, and I think that all of you have done this before, these should be pretty familiar to you. The goals of our scorecard are to fund organizations that have the capacity to run effective programs. So this means that they can manage and administer a CoC program, a federal program. They can do that on a reimbursement basis. It just means that they have the ability to administer a grant. Number 2 is to fund projects that reflect the North Carolina Balanced Estate CoC and HUD priorities. So there are lots of priorities in that we're going to be scoring as we go through the scorecards. And there, we have policies and procedures that our grantees are supposed to be following. We have a funding priorities document that we'll talk about in a little bit that really lays out what projects that are funded should be doing. Number 3 is we want to incentivize agencies to be good partners. Participation in our communities is incredibly important. There are, as you all know, we have to run coordinated entry systems and across our CoC. It's important that any agencies that we are funding with projects funded through CoC funding, that they are actively participating in coordinated entry, that they are on HMIS, or if they're a domestic violence or victim service provider, that they are using a comparable database, that they are actively participating in their regional committee, that they are really there for the rest of the community. As we know, this is a community-wide problem, and so we need to make sure that our agencies are well invested in the community planned in homelessness. And number 4, ensure that funded projects are being good stewards of the North Carolina Balanced Estate CoC funding and performing to standards. This is really important. As we get into the ranking process, this is one of the things that the scorecard allows us to do, is to really see how especially for our renewal grantees, are they using their money well? Are they performing well? Are they going to be able to do the things that we're asking them to do? So you all are going to be focused on the combined scoring section in the scorecard. There are 2 sections in each one of our scorecards. The first section is the combined scoring section. And in the combined scoring section, we have 1 project review committee member and 1 NCCEH staff member that will independently be scoring each one of our applications. And in this section, these are mostly the subjective questions that you will be looking at in the combined scoring section, where there may be some nuance in how you look at it, and whether or not applicants are meeting various parts of the application and requirements. And so we want to make sure that we have double eyes on those. So as you can see here, we'll have a score from an NCCEH member, we'll have a score from a project review committee member, and then that will be added up and averaged between the 2 scores for that combined scoring section. I think the important part of this is, since these are averaged, it's okay with points, but we also have thresholds and standards, which we will talk about in just a few minutes, more in line with how we did the ESG process, where you're deciding whether the application has met or unmet certain parts of what we're looking for. And in those cases, you might not be able to come to agreement together, the staff member and the project review committee member. And that just, for us, that means that we will do extra review to figure out and to break that tie. And as we said, there is also a staff scoring area that will be completed by NCCEH staff. These are objective components of the application and are things that are more black and white. This is the performance scoring area. So looking at annual performance reports, data quality reports, where there actually is a number that we can look at, and it's very black and white about whether or not they've met that. So staff, at the same time as we're doing the combined scoring section with project review committee members, behind the scenes will also be scoring each one of the applications for the staff scoring section in the scorecard. So what ends up happening is that to get the final score for each one of the applications, we'll add the combined scoring, which is that average between the NCCH staff member and the project review committee member, plus the staff scoring section into a total score. So you guys, your next meeting, the Project Review Committee will meet on October 7th at 1 p.m. And this is when we're going to present some options for you to create that recommended prioritization ranking list. So staff will provide you guys as members with information about standards and thresholds, the funding priorities. We'll look at point totals, and then we'll look at special project considerations. We know so far, based on the initial submission, which is important for folks to know, we have 32 project applications that we're going to score and rank. It's important to know that there are some things that are beyond the scoring and ranking process. We talked about one of those earlier, which is the CoC planning grant. We also have the HMIS project and the supportive services only project for coordinated entry. As well as that planning project. They are not going to be scored in this process. Our scorecards are not meant to score these infrastructure style grants or applications. We will, however, have to rank the HMIS project and the coordinated entry project in the final list. So that's something to keep in mind. Historically, those infrastructure grants, which are grants that cover all 79 counties and affect every grantee's ability to meet HUD requirements, have been ranked at the top of the ranking list. That has been precedent, and we will talk through that more as we get to October 7th. So at that meeting, the committee is going to discuss and finalize that ranking proposal. And then that prioritization ranking list is going to be sent to the steering committee for their approval on October 13th. And we certainly, if that date is not on your calendar, we would love for you to be there to be able to offer feedback. This will be a special steering committee meeting. This is not during the regular steering committee time. So we're doing this as a special meeting specifically to talk about the CoC process and to present all of the information and be as transparent as possible about the process for this year's CoC competition. So you'll have options in creating that prioritization ranking list. You'll have renewal applications where you can choose to reallocate parts or all of renewal applicants to fund a project. So there's that option of, if there are projects that are not spending their money, or we find that they have significant performance issues, you have the ability to reallocate dollars from them and put those towards new projects. And that could be partial or full. And then we'll have a number of new applicants too. I think we have 10 new applications, at least as of the first submission date. So we assume that we'll have 10 full new applications. You have the ability to kind of look at what their budgets are to see how that fits into the amount of money that we have left. So that means that you can reduce or increase budget amounts if you need to be able to get within, I would say, our fair share or our pro rata amount. or you can increase it, right? If we don't have enough good applications, but we have a couple of really great applications and the money that they have applied for doesn't quite reach those amounts, we absolutely want to take advantage of every available dollar that we can apply for. So it's possible that you could increase budgets as long as it makes sense for that program type and for that agency. You can choose which of the new grants to recommend for funding. There is no way that we are going to be able, if precedent holds, and typically we want to fund renewal projects, especially our housing projects, because it affects whether or not some people in community can stay in housing. If that precedent holds, and we want to fund new projects and recommend them for funding, we likely will not have nearly enough money to be able to fund 10 project applications. So we will have to make decisions about which new project applications we want to move forward. And the good thing is that we have a lot of options here. We can fund those new projects through the CoC bonus, which is almost $700,000. DV bonus projects we can fund specifically with those DV bonus dollars, and we can also reallocate dollars from renewals to be able to fund some of our new projects. So we will be using the 2021 CoC Funding Priorities document to choose and rank projects. This is something that we have used. I think this is the 4th or 5th year that we've had CoC Funding Priorities. Those priorities are put together by our Funding and Performance Subcommittee, which is our subcommittee within the CoC that's looking at our data and really coming up with strategies to recommend to the steering committee to implement across our CoC. So that document was approved by our steering committee in May of 2021, and it really allows the project review committee to have some guidance in how to about which applications to fund and how to rank those projects in the final prioritization ranking list. So the funding priorities document sets overall priorities for the North Carolina Balance of State CoC in 4 ways. One is to ensure that essential infrastructure elements are in place, and that's including the homeless management information system dollars, as well as the coordinated entry dollars that allow us to do those work and meet those HUD requirements. Number 2 is to ensure adequate coverage of permanent supportive housing across the CoC. I think most of you guys know that this is the only major federal funding source for general population people experiencing homelessness for permanent supportive housing. So it has been a top priority to use CoC dollars for permanent supportive housing, and as best as possible to get as good a coverage across our 79 counties. The third priority is to increase the availability of rapid rehousing. While we can get rapid rehousing through various funding sources, including emergency solutions grant funding, we know that that's not enough, not nearly enough. And since for the majority of our population, they probably only need short or medium term assistance, rapid rehousing is important, and CoC dollars can help us scale up those programs across our 79 counties. And then our last priority is to ensure CoC funding is being used well, including potentially reallocating some funding from projects that have patterns of low spending or poor performance. And over the last few years, we have looked very closely at grant spending and have reallocated dollars from agencies that have a history of poor spending. We have also looked at performance and particularly at program design to determine whether or not dollars need to be reallocated or taken away from agencies that are not following CoC and HUD standards. It would probably be a good idea. Many of you probably have already looked at the CoC Funding Priorities document, but it would probably be worth your while, especially as we get to that October 7th date, to look at the Funding Priorities document. Not only does it set those overall funding priorities, but for new projects, it helps us to prioritize in each one of our individual regions what priority projects like rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing have, in relative to their other regional counterparts. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the scorecard, what the review is going to look like. So we do have 2 scorecards that you'll be using. They are very similar. So when you look at them, they're very similar, but we do measure some different things if you're a new applicant versus a renewal applicant. So we will have a new scorecard that's going to have a greater focus on agency capacity and experience. Some of the agencies that will be putting in new projects are agencies that currently have CoC grants, or they have other funding for that type of activity. And so there may be some performance things that we look at, but we really, because CoC is so different than other federal programs, because the administration is really heavy and there are lots of requirements, we do look very closely at the ability of agencies to operate these types of programs. It is a lot of money. For the, these are grants that are much bigger than things like ESG. So we want to make sure that they have the ability, especially on a reimbursement basis, to have the cash flow to do that they have the administrative capacity to meet those requirements. We also have a renewal scorecard. As we talked about earlier, there is a greater focus on our renewals on performance. They have had the money, and so we want to make sure that that they're spending that money wisely and they're helping the people that the CoC is prioritizing. Now, for both of these scorecards, there are some basic standards of program design that are very important. In the past, we have used those standards of program design to help us rank the list in a prioritization order. So what you'll see in the scorecard, they're organized in 4 different key categories. And these are kind of in the order of importance. So this is, as you're looking at the scorecard, or as we start looking at the scorecard, you'll pay attention to what kind of question this is. So thresholds are things that we expect all agencies to have in place in order to be funded. So these are essential components, essential things that absolutely have to be in place. If they don't meet that threshold, then they are not allowed to continue in the funding process. They will not be put forward on the funding prioritization list. The second thing that we look at are standards. Now, these are high priorities for projects. These are things that we ideally want all of our projects to meet, but we also understand that projects are in some different areas, right, in their history or in their capacity. And so it may take them a little while to get to the ideal, and we want to support them with technical assistance and training to be able to get there. At the same time, when we are looking at a limited amount of money, and we are comparing like projects with one another, then those projects that are meeting the standards that the CoC has set are likely to be ranked higher in the project list, that prioritization list, or to be funded over a project if there's not enough money for a project that does not meet those standards. The next thing that we look at is section minimums. So, kind of like things like there's a general application section, there's a racial equity section, there's a program design section, there's a performance section, and each one of those different sections in the scorecard has a minimum score that applicants must meet or it goes into a review process. And the reason why we have always done this in the balance of state is that we want well-rounded projects, right? We don't want a project that scores really high on the application. Like they write a really great application, but they have terrible performance. Or, the standards for program design, they're serving like really kind of low vulnerability people, right? So they don't meet the minimums in those other sections, but they did in the general application section. And so this allows us to really compare projects with one another to see how well-rounded those projects are. that they meet kind of the full scope of what we're looking for this COC. So when a project after the scorecard is complete and the scoring, we've completed our scoring, we'll look at each one of those sections and see if they met those minimums. Those that did not meet minimums, we'll do some further review to see where they are and whether or not they should be put forward. And then the last thing are points. So what's typical, right? Typical in scorecards is you score them, right? It's inherent in the name of what we're using, the scorecard. But we use points as a way to incentivize practices and to pull higher performing projects up the ranking list. So, after looking at standards, after looking at minimums, then we're looking at points. And a lot of times those are used as tiebreakers. So if we have 6 projects that all have met all of the standards and all of the minimums, then we would use points as a way to order them to tie break that they've all met their standards and minimums. So applicants are scored on the materials that are submitted by the published deadlines. That's a really important piece because otherwise, if we don't hold to those deadlines, then suddenly we could be getting material 4 days after the deadline. It would make our scoring process, the integrity of the process that we put in place, it would put that in jeopardy. So what we will do is we will send project review committee members materials for each application that they score. We've been talking about you're scoring the application, but many of you have done this before. And so you understand that it's not only the application, but you're also looking at supplementary materials as well as, things like policies and procedures, threshold forms that they have to fill out, things that help fill in the gaps that the application doesn't tell us. So you're gonna use the submitted application and those supplementary documents to score each question in the combined scoring section that applies to the project type. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the scorecards, which we're going to do right now. So give me just a second, and I'm going to pull up the scorecard. I think. Well, it may take a minute. I've been off that screen for a little while, so it's going to take a minute for it to refresh, I think.
That's easy to score there, Brian.
Do what?
That was easy to score, blank.
Okay, good. Yes, good. All right. So we're going to look at, we're going to start with the new project scorecard because it is the one that has more questions. And most of the things that are in the new scorecard are also in the renewal scorecard. So we won't have as much to review for the renewal. So what we're going to send you, hopefully you all can see this. Is that big enough or do I need to make that bigger?
Please make it bigger, Brian.
I have to figure out how to do that though. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that should help. Is that better? Hopefully that's better for you. Okay, good. So the scorecards that we're going to send you are going to be fillable PDF forms. So all you're going to need to do when you get it is you're going to go to that question and you're going to fill in the answer, okay? And then you will save it. When you get done, you'll save your scorecard. If you will save it with the agency name and the project name, and then you'll send that to your project review committee member that you're going to be partnered with on each one of the applications. I saw a chat, but I don't know what it said. So hold on a second. Let me figure out what that said. Oh, there you go. Great. Thank you, Laura. So let's look at the first page of the new scorecard. So as we talked about earlier, this first part is going to outline the goals of the scorecard. That's what we went through just a little bit earlier, but we wanted to make sure that was on each one of the scorecards in case you forget what the scorecard is meant. You can always go back and look at that. And then at the table at the bottom down here, It's going to allow you to put in your name as the reviewer, the applicant, the project name, what project type you're looking at. We will want you to do a signature. You can just type in your name, and that can serve as an electronic signature for you, and then you'll date it. So as you see here, this is fillable. So you can, I'm gonna just put in my name. You can see that it's gonna be real easy for you, and you can't mess anything up because it's not gonna let you go anywhere else. So hopefully that will be much easier for you this year as you do it. You can also print it out and you can write on it. That's also feasible. You will have to scan it though, and I know that if folks are working at home, they might not have the scanning capability to do that. So we wanted to make it easier for you with a fillable format. So on the second page, this probably looks familiar to you. The top of the page really is explaining the scoring process for the project, including how the standards and the thresholds are going to work. And then it will also say with the maximum score that the applicant can receive based on the project type. So PSH applicants can get up to 142 points if they were to score everything. No one ever gets close to 142 because of those incentivizing points, right, as we go through. But you can see that those are ordered in this way. You do not have to worry about putting in your project score. Because you are only doing the combined score, you can just leave that project score part blank. So as we talked about, what you're going to get is you're only going to get a scorecard that's truncated. So it's only going to have the combined scoring section of the scorecard. If you want to look at the full scorecard with the staff section, you can go to our website and the full scorecard is there. But we thought it would be easier so that you knew exactly what you needed to score. Every question on here, if it applies to the project type that you're working on, of the application that you're working on, you should fill out this entire thing because the entire thing for you is going to be the combined scoring section. So as we said, there's going to be one project review committee member and one staff member that will be scoring the combined scoring section. So you will have an NCCEH staff partner, and we'll talk a little bit more about the next steps with that, but we want to make sure you knew that. So just some general things as we get here. This applies to both the new and the renewal scorecard. Here are the things that each section really follows. It follows a similar pattern. So it's going to have the name of the section. You can see here, section 1, general application. All of those questions are going to be blocked together. So as you go through, all of section 1 there's going to be a block around all of those. It's going to indicate at the top, right under that section name, the possible point totals per component type. So whatever activity of the application that you're evaluating. It's also going to show those minimum points. So that's the minimum that applicants have to meet to not trigger that second review. The questions are numbered on the left. So as you can see, we have all the questions for that section numbered here to the left. And the question is what you should be answering with materials that you review. So what you'll see here is you have the question. So right here, consistency of mission is the section or subsection. Does the project fit within the mission of the agency? Does the agency currently serve homeless households in their community? And what you're going to see under that in brackets is what you're going to look at in order to score that question. So to answer 1.1a, to see if it's met, unmet documentation not provided, you're going to look at the new project form, and we will send that to you and the collection of materials for each of your applications. So let's talk just a little bit about standards and thresholds. This is pretty standard. You'll see met, unmet documentation not provided. Sometimes you'll have an NA there as well. I think met and unmet are pretty clear. Sometimes folks get confused with unmet documentation not provided. Everything's not a threshold. So there are applicants who may not send in something that they should have submitted. If what you're supposed to be looking at, so for instance, if 1.1a, you're scoring that question, and in the materials that you get, you don't get a new project form, that means that they did not submit it, because we would be sending it to you otherwise. So that means that, and for answer to this question, you can't tell if it's met or unmet because they didn't give you anything. So you would mark unmet documentation not provided. If they provide the documents, but you can't find it in their documents, then it would be unmet. So you only use unmet documentation not provided if you don't actually physically have the document to look at. I hope that makes sense, and that's a little bit clearer than it has been in years past. Let's talk about points for a second. So we're going to go down here. We're going to look at this one. So if the question being answered is for points, if there's a grid, and we'll show you that in just a little bit as we go through here. If there's a grid, you have to follow the points based on the grid. If there's no grid, like in 1.2a, 1.2b, and 1.2c, where there's not a grid, it just says possible score. That means that you can score the question from 0 to the maximum number of points. So if you're answering the question, you're looking at the project application, question 3B, does the project description address all parts of the detailed instructions? You can see that it's a possible point value of 3 points. That means that you could score this after looking at the answer, the document that you're supposed to look at. You could score it 0 points, 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points. We do ask that you do whole numbers and not partial numbers. That'll just make the averaging a little bit easier. But you can score anywhere from 0 to 3 points. All of these are a max score of 3. So all 3 of these, you can score them anywhere from 0 to 3 points based on their answer and what you're looking at. As you can see here, there are some questions that have a bolded piece at the beginning of them. So if we look at 1.2b, you see PSH, RRH, THRRH only. That means it only applies to those applications that are for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or transitional housing, rapid rehousing. We don't have any transitional rapid rehousing applications, so you're not going to have to worry about that one. But that means you only have to answer that question. So if, for instance, you got an SSO grant that you were working on, you won't, but in case you do, if you had that, then you wouldn't have to answer that question. You will see that throughout. There are questions that are only for permanent supportive housing. There are questions that are only for rapid rehousing. If you're scoring the opposite, then you don't have to, you can skip that question. You can just mark it as NA. You can just mark it as 0, whatever you want to do. But just make sure that you don't have to answer those questions that don't apply to the activity that you are scoring. All right, so before I go on, I want to see if you'll have any questions about any of those things. Any questions about those? Does that make sense?
It made sense to me.
Okay, good. I'm
I
glad.
don't know if that's helpful since I helped develop this, way back when, but but it still looks accurate, sure.
Okay. All right, so let's go through the new scorecard. We're going to go through section by section. So section 1 is the general application section. So you can see this is a lot about how they're answering some questions in the application. We're looking at mission fit. We're looking at prior experience. So as you can see, these questions down here, as I talked about, 1.2a through 1.2c are possible points. So you can give them from 0 to 3 points each. Section 2 is a really important section. This is a section that we have historically used as precedent to kind of help us with our ranking list. This is all about program design. So this section really digs deeper into how the applicant agency has designed its project and measures whether this meets CoC and HUD standards and priorities. So question 2.1. This is especially important for our new applicants. We were looking to see whether or not the agency has proven that the project is needed in the community. So what you should see in this section, or when you're looking at the new project form, in this narrative, you should be seeing a narrative that uses data to prove that the size and scope of the project meets the community need. So, for instance, if they say that, you know, there are only 3 people that we have that are homeless in our community, but they're applying for $150,000. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? That would be unmet because they're not really meeting a community need with the $150,000 grant. And you know, they may have a lot more people on having a smaller grant. That's probably met. So you want to look at that one really closely and make sure that that makes sense. Throughout this section, as we talked about earlier, there are several questions for SSOCE projects and for transitional housing, rapid rehousing only projects. We are not expecting any applications for either of those projects. So for everybody on this call, you should be able to skip those. You can just mark those NA or just skip those and don't answer those. All right. So let's see. I do want to point out, there are some questions here about targeting subpopulations. So you're going to be looking at their program policies and procedures here to see, are they targeting any of these audiences? For permanent supportive housing projects, everybody should be marking people experiencing chronic homelessness. So this is one of those questions that is from 0 to 5 points. And so you can score anywhere in that region based on, you know, the level of targeting that they're doing with those various subpopulations. You are getting into some threshold questions here, so it's really important that they have this. If they're a PSH project, they have to have this notice in their policies and procedures or they can't move forward. There are some questions specifically about permanent supportive housing projects. This one is applicable to both the joint component project, that transitional rapid rehousing and rapid rehousing projects. So you could score this one because this does apply for rapid rehousing projects. And then let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to see where I am. And then there's some information about match. So this is what I want to point out here is this one's a little bit different than the points that we've used before. So we talked about there being a grid. So there are 2 bullet points here. If they meet both of those, they get 10 points. If they meet one bullet, they get 5 points. If they meet neither bullet, then it's 0 points. So this is not, you know, you don't have a choice except to assign points based on what's in the scorecard here. So it's a little bit different than the possible points on some of our questions. The next questions are going to be about housing first. These apply to all applications that you're going to be seeing. You're going to be looking at policies and procedures. In this case, you're going to be looking at the sample lease that might help you to see whether or not they meet this. This is a threshold for all new projects, so it's important to really dig in. What you may see is nothing in their policies and procedures. There are some places where, you know, they might not have the information in. So you're looking for the lack of information versus something specifically stating that we don't, you know, we don't use income as an application. I mean, an eligibility requirement. So the lack of that being in the policies and procedures could tell you the answer to the question. So we're going to do housing first. We have 2 questions on that. One is about screening processes, and the other one is about termination processes. And then we're going to get into the program standards for both permanent supportive housing and for rapid rehousing. There are, I think, 11 for permanent supportive housing. We will be using policies and procedures and sample leases to be able to answer these standards questions. The good thing for you guys is one of the things that we have, we put in place, I think, in the last competition period is we ask them to identify in their policies and procedures where this exists. So they give us a page number that will help you when you go through policies and procedures. So be aware that there is going to be that information in the information that we give you, the materials that we give you. take a close look at that. That will save you a lot of time as you're going through the policies and procedures for these, for permanent supportive housing key elements. And then when you get down to rapid rehousing, I think there are 24 of these. So yes, please use that. That will save you a lot of time, because you can look at this in the scorecard and you can look where they've identified in their policies and procedures and see if those things match. All right. Section 3, I'm going to skip through these. These are all the program standards for rapid rehousing. So you can take a look at those a little bit later. If you've done it before, they are exactly the same as we've done in years past. Section 3 is about scope of services. So we're looking specifically at the application here. You'll notice that these are possible scores. So that means that you can go from 0 to the maximum level. So 3.1, you can do 0 to 6 points. Again, we ask that you use whole numbers there. And then new to our scorecard this year, this is both in the new and the renewal scorecard, is an equity section. So I do need to make a little bit of a caveat here. We do have some things in brackets here. What we found was that was a little more difficult than we wanted it to be. And so we have actually put this on the new project form, answers to the questions. So we've actually asked these questions on the new project form. That's where you will go. And in the new project form, it says whether or not they have to give supplementary materials if they answer a certain way. So for instance, does the applicant have client facing, no, it's not that one. Let's look at 4.3. Does the applicant contract with interpreter services? So in the new project form, you will see that question. They will answer it. If the answer is yes, then we ask them to provide the MOA or the MOU. So there would be there would be something else there that proves that for them. So if they answer yes, then they should be sending that, and that should be in the materials that we send to you. So that is a little bit different than we had originally planned with the scorecard, to make it easier on them and to make it easier on us to score. So all of the questions that are in the equity section, they should all appear in the new project form, and the new project form, depending on their answer, says whether or not they have to also submit something else for you to review. So pay really close attention to that new project form. This is, as we said, this is a new section for us. This was created as we were working on the 2020 scorecard. And so we want to see how this section works. So we will probably want some feedback from you about how that has worked for you, and whether these questions working with an application and the materials that you're using, how that works. All right. That is the end of the new scorecard. So I'm going to pull up the renewal scorecard real quick. Let me do that. All right. So as you can see, the renewal scorecard looks very similar. It has very similar sections to the other. It's fillable, so you can put in your name, you can put in the applicant, the project name, all of those things. You can click boxes for yourself. It does the same thing with the maximum scores. We only have PSH and rapid rehousing renewals that will be scored, so that's why those are the only two that appear there. And we're only going to give you the combined section for the fillable form. So you'll see that it has the general application section, just like the other one. This also has the program design section. We're not measuring as many things because we don't have to think about the same way for capacity, because we've already done that review in prior years when they were new applicants. So the program design section is really looking at housing first, permanent supportive key elements, and then those rapid rehousing benchmarks. And then I'm going to skip through those real quick. I know we're going fast. Same questions around targeting and leverage that are in the other one. And then equity. We have that equity section. It's the exact same section. Same things apply. Everything's on the new project threshold form that you can look at, and it will tell you whether or not to expect other things based on their answer. Okay, and that's it for the renewal. So it's very, very similar to the new. It just skips a couple of the sections where we're gauging the capacity for that agency and mission fit. All right, let me switch back to our orientation slides, and we'll finish this out. All right, okay, here we go. So, like we said, we have 22, we're gonna have 22 renewal applications from 10 agencies. We're expecting 10 new project applications from 10 agencies. Some of those agencies also have renewals, so you may get both their renewal and their new applications, so you'll need to pay attention to that. And then what we were expecting was that each project review committee would likely have 3 to 4 applications. That was based on having all of our project review committee members here. Obviously, that has not happened. We only have 3 of you here today. I'm glad that we recorded this so we can get some commitments from other folks. We will reach out to them and ask them if they are planning on participating. If hopefully we will get at least a few more people. And if we are unable to do that, then that means the onus is on you guys to try and make up some of that slack. So obviously that means that you may be doing closer to 10 applications. What we will do though is we will pair, especially on the renewal side, we have several applicants that are doing, they have several projects that are like projects, so it requires you only to go through projects like policies and procedures one time. So for instance, Community Link has 5 grants, or 6 grants. 5 of them are permanent supportive housing grants. We would likely assign those all to the same person, so they only have to go through the policy and procedure review once. You would have to go through the application questions because the applications could vary. They're probably similar, but they could vary just a little bit. So you'd have to go through those questions, but you'd only have to do the policy and procedure review once. So that will make that a lot easier, a lot faster for you. But we are going to try and drum up more folks for the project review committee. So you probably are going to have more than 3 to 4, though, I would imagine. I don't know if we can gather all 9 of the projected members to be available for this. So just next steps on communication. So the submission date is Monday, this coming Monday at 6 p.m. So when we come into the office on Tuesday, we will begin organizing all of that information, getting that in order to be able to send emails to you. So we will send you a copy of the scorecard, the assigned application, some instructions, and the name of your NCCH staff partner. We are going to probably send those packaged together. So we're going to send you smart sheet rows. I think that you all have seen that in the past. That's how we have done that in the past. So we're going to send you the smart sheet row that has all of the materials attached to it. And then we'll probably send you kind of a general instruction email at first and let you know these are the projects you're doing, and then you'll get individual smart sheet rows after that. So what's going to happen is you're going to score all the questions in the combined section that apply to the project type being scored. So that's an important piece to just pay attention to at the very beginning. This is a permanent supportive housing application, or this is a RAF3 housing project application, so that you don't answer questions that you don't have to. So after scoring, you're going to have a call with NCCH staff. Probably your call is going to be about 20 minutes per application. If you have multiple applications from the same agency, it may take you a little bit longer, but it shouldn't take you like the full amount of time to do a full application. So we're going to try and minimize the number of calls that you have to have. So that's all that organizing work, so that you don't have to schedule, like if you have 10 applications, 10 calls. You'll probably have 2 calls, or at most 3 calls, but probably 2 calls. You're going to discuss each question to see if you can come to consensus. Like we said, it's okay if scores differ. points are going to be averaged. With the thresholds and standards differences, I think you'll have some discussion. One of you may have seen something that the other one didn't, and you can convince the other person to change. That's perfectly fine. If that doesn't happen, that's fine too. All that means is that it will trigger a review of someone else to go in and kind of reconcile that and figure out which way to go. And then you'll send your scorecards to your NCCEH partner. All scoring has to be done by September 30th for us to meet our deadline. So work on that. Your assigned NCCEH staff member will be reaching out to you to schedule the call. So you don't have to worry about scheduling the call. NCCEH staff will be reaching out to you and getting that call scheduled with you. And they should be doing that early in the week. So all of them are on, I think, today. So they're all hearing that too. So they will be doing that early in the week because, schedules are out of control. I know everybody's got a lot on their plates. So we want to make sure that we get those scheduled. And then after the scoring is complete on September 30th, NCCEH staff will be working on organizing all of that information, putting it together in some ways so that you all can take a look at it. You're going to attend the October 7th meeting. It's from 1 to 3. Hopefully we won't need that whole time, but we want to make sure that we have it on the calendar in case we need it. We will be looking at ranking lists. So it will be important, if you can, to be online and to use the online platform. That way you can see those ranking lists, see the presentation as we're going through. Audio generally works better than being on the computer itself. I know that you all have done that today. We're using the same platform, so just do what you normally do. It's all worked well today, so that should work. But just in case, that's the information. And that's it. That's where we are. So kind of we're ready to roll. You all have the information to be able to do the scoring, and we're going to get all that stuff to you next week with some instructions. All right.
Brian.
Yes, Denise.
Yes, hi. I have a question about October the 7th.
Yeah.
Could I be late for that meeting? The reason I'm asking, that's our Veteran Stand Down Day, and I am on point for that from 10 to 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I think we will still be going at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, this is Monica. I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, let me see if I can say this question so it makes sense. So everybody's going to have a lot lower spending because of COVID, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I can't believe that really everybody's spending as high as they usually are. So how are we going to do that for renewal grants? Are we just kind of go with that they didn't expend as much as they usually do? I mean, it's always behind a year, so I always get confused. So it's this application that is gonna see that, right? Or this is really based on 2019?
It depends. I mean, a lot of it depends on what their grant year is, because we use the last completed grant year.
Right.
For full spending. So some people could be a year ago, and some people could have just ended, right? So I think that's something that we'll have to take into consideration with the project review committee, because we know there are effects of the pandemic that is going to affect all of the renewals on spending, or could have affected them on spending. I mean, you all could hold them harmless this year. I mean, if there are egregious spending issues, then you could take some action. Like if someone only spent 30% of a $500,000 grant, then there's some significant issues that are not about pandemic there. That means that they just didn't have anybody in housing, pretty much. The other thing is that historically, or traditionally, we have looked at historic spending. So just because they have one bad spending year, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a reallocation. We usually look at a history of spending issues when we have done reallocation in the past. So for instance, we reallocated East Point a couple of years ago, but we looked at the last 2 to 3 years of their spending, and they had spent well under 80% of their grant for 3 years. And so in that way, there was a history of, well, they just don't need it because they've three years in a row, they've not spent their money, versus one who has like an off year where for some reason they had a bunch of move outs and they had trouble finding housing, and maybe they only spent 75% of their funds, but traditionally, historically, they have spent 95% of their funds. So I think in that way, it probably, that when we're looking at spending for possible reallocation, I think that's what we would probably look at. And you all can make those decisions, right? We could just hold them harmless this year and say, no, we're not even going to look at spending unless it's below a certain level. And we'll bring all of that to you. I haven't even looked at spending yet, so I have no idea where people are.
Yeah, I just know that it's just been tough, finding people housing. And so it's hard to spend money when you can't put somebody in housing. So, so I guess that's been a little tough, especially for due to the pandemic. But I always, with CoC spending, I always get confused of what year, because sometimes it's back. For some of the grants, it could be back to 2019, and never hit into 2020 now. And so, I always, it's always one of those things I have to look close on.
Yeah,
well, maybe
we didn't even do
that.
Yeah.
Use the funding to purchase a house.
And we didn't even look at spending in 2020. So we have to go back and kind of look there too. If somebody has a spending issue, we would look at 2020 spending, or what we would have looked at for 2020 spending, which could go back even further just to see what that historical piece looks like. But we have had in the past where we've held renewals harmless for reasons beyond their control. And that may be the case that we don't reallocate due to spending in the coming year. So, other questions? You guys are experienced that are online today, so I'm glad that we have some folks who have some experience doing this with us. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.